Welcome to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Foster, a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, and spiritual mentor, here to provide you with the next steps towards your dream reality, along with clarity and deep validation while on your spiritual journey. I have an immense passion for all things paranormal, spiritual, and of course, having some super fun chats with incredibly knowledgeable people. In each episode, we will expand our minds, ignite our inner psychics, embrace our spiritual awakening journeys, and live a super grounded, witchy life. I hope you learned something new in today's episode. Yay! Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I am so happy you're listening, and I'm also so happy to bring back one of my favorite guests, Jeff Byrd. He came on the podcast one last episode about attachment styles, which was very interesting. And I love how your brain works and how intelligent you are and how easily you're able to explain information. That's very critical, I think, to spirituality, but also just living in general. So I'm excited to have you on. Why don't you, for people who didn't listen to the last episode that you were on, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us more about you?
Well, thanks, Mac. Thanks for having me back. And yeah, it's good to be back. I love talking about these things. And I'm so glad that you do too, and that we get to do it together. So thank you again. Looking forward to this one. This is a great topic on PTSD and complex PTSD. So can't wait to jump into it. But my name's Jeff Byrd. I own Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and I do a lot of things. The thing most pertinent to this is probably that I'm a brain health coach with Dr. Amen. So I'm one of his licensed trainers. I'm also a speaker, a trainer, a coach with John Maxwell Leadership. I do personality and communication styles using DISC. I do that for teams and organizations. And I'm also a value-based leadership trainer with Global Priority Solutions. And I write for a magazine, and I do interviews, and I do other things like that. I've done radio shows. I've done a fair amount of things. But the thing that's most pertinent today, like I said, is the brain health training with Dr. Amen. Because he's a double. I'm not a certified psychiatrist or psychologist or doctor, but he is all of those things. So he's a double board certified psychiatrist and a child psychologist. And so I kind of let him do the 25 years of schoolwork and pay for that. And then I get all of his best thinking from it, and then I get to pass that on.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh. You do so much. Have you ever heard of human design?
Yes, but I'm not intimately familiar with it.
Okay, I'd be interested to, because you sound like me with so many like interests and passions, and human design is it combines like the chakra system, astrology, and like
Oh.
it's like a huge personality test, but it's more spiritual. You should definitely check it out. I feel like you'd be a manifesting generator because you those people, because I am
Good
a
to know.
manifesting generator because I'm just so busy all the time, and like my brain is so like flexible and like absorbing so much all the time, and we have so many different interests. So I think you would be a manifesting generator, but you
Right.
should do it and tell me who you are.
Oh, that sounds fun. I love doing those kinds of tests and learning new stuff about myself. And yeah, I like the chakra stuff anyways. I mean, I especially like the frequencies that pertain to different things, and listening to those is always fun. I love the ground. I love the grounded part. That's like my favorite one, is the sacral. So that's one of the best things, because I think that's what we all need in this day and age, is some grounding.
Yes, to get out of our head and back into our
No kidding.
bodies.
Amen.
Yes. Okay,
All
so
right.
we are talking about PTSD and CPTSD. So that's a pretty um broad topic, and we're going to be touching on a lot of things. But I just wanted to give a little background on like why we're talking about this. So again, it was one of the two things. I think, actually, I have a terrible memory. I could be totally making this up, but it goes back to the reason why we recorded the last episode is because you were at my mom's house. We were chilling at her dining room table, and I don't remember how the conversation started, of course, but you brought up complex PTSD and PTSD and what it looks like in the brain. And we were talking to Keith, my stepdad. Shout out Keith, because I know he listens to this.
Yeah.
But we were talking about how it affects people, and I was just like, wow, you know a lot about this, and I've always wanted to like really understand what this is for my clients, but also just for myself and my loved ones and all of that. So, um, yeah, isn't that how we started talking about this, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, you have a better memory than you think you do.
Okay, good. Cool. Thank you for saying
That's
that.
exactly what happened.
Okay, cool. So, why don't we start off if you could please define what PTSD is and what complex PTSD is for people who don't know, including myself, because I really don't know the actual definition.
Okay, so now I'm just putting this in my words the way I think about it. This is not a clinical or a medical diagnosis or explanation. This is Jeff's explanation.
Okay.
So when I think about PTSD, so I just break down the term. So it stands for post traumatic stress disorder. So it's a disorder that comes about after, that's the post part, after you experience a traumatic stress.
Mm.
Now, if you go to a doctor and get a clinical diagnosis, they're going to give categories of stressors that may and see if you've been through any of them and see how your behavior has been affected, your life has been affected. They're going to look for those things, and you have to have a number of, I think it's like four different things they look for in order to get a diagnosis of that. Now, my personal thought is that it's not just a certain set of things. It's like a spectrum, like they say that people are on the autism spectrum, because it can be like severe at one end, or it can be all the way up to the other end, a very functional thing, like the Good Doctor. If you ever watched that, he was highly functional, a brilliant surgeon, but very autistic.
Oh, yeah,
So
I've seen that.
yeah, so it's cool. I think of it like a spectrum. I think so. There's a hugely identifiable thing if you've been through certain types of stress. Like I first started hearing about this when people were coming back from the Gulf War, right? That they had been through post traumatic stress, because obviously they're getting injured, they're coming back injured, their life's been radically changed, they've seen friends killed, and they're just bringing all of this back. So that is clearly a PTSD thing. Now, in the brain, you mentioned the brain. In the brain, it shows up on a brain scan. If you take a functional SPECT scan and look at the brain, there will be like a diamond pattern. And this bottom part of the diamond here is the thalamus. That's the anxiety center of the brain. These 2 points on the right and the left would be the basal ganglia. Those are the emotional centers of the brain. And this point up here on the top, I'm wiggling on my fingers. The point on the top is the anterior cingulate gyrus. That is the brain's gear shifter that lets you go from thought to thought.
Mm.
So when you've got your anxiety center on high alert, your emotional centers, and it's never a good thing. Whenever you see the emotional centers up, it's never good emotions. It's always anxious, fearful, bad emotions. So when you see those lit up and you can't get to another thought, that's where the anterior cingulate comes in. When you can't get to another thought, you're stuck. You are stuck in that anxious, emotionally loaded scenario. That's what your brain is doing. Okay, so
Okay.
the way that manifests is you just can't move on. It's like, so, and it depends on the person too. It's like different people can move on from different things, but some things they were traumatic enough that you just never get past that. You might be 50 years old and still living in that today of when you were 14 and something terrible happened. You might be stuck in that and you just can't move on. You're going through the motions of life, but you're not really living because you're living every day like it was that day.
Mm.
Okay, so
Like,
that's what PTSD. Okay, go
like,
ahead.
sorry, like emotionally, you're in like subconsciously, maybe like your brain is stuck in that like feeling, right?
Yeah, it could be subconscious or it could be very conscious. Some
Okay.
people with real clinical PTSD, I mean, they'll actually disassociate from the present moment, and in their minds, they will be back in that moment. Like
Right.
like you see
Okay.
that on some shows or something where a soldier comes back from a conflict or something, and then they just all of a sudden blank out, and in their mind they're living in that conflict. They hear something that startles them, and they think that they're getting attacked by terrorists or something like that, or they're in that in their mind they are actually in that moment. So it's not, so it can be subconscious, it can just be following you around, or it can be very conscious to the point where you just can't carry out normal duties or functions of life.
Okay. That makes sense. And I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that I can be subconscious too, because I think that's pretty common,
Right.
obviously. Like, our brains are still telling us a story of the past, and it is from can be from trauma. And yeah, I see that a lot with clients, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that everybody's carrying a trauma of some sort. We have all been informed by things that happened and the messages about our identity, our worth, the security, life, safety, all of those things, and they're there whether we like it or not. So I think everybody's going through some sort of trauma. I mean, none of us live in a perfect. I mean, this is definitely an imperfect world that we're all in. And so we all have touches of the imperfection, even if they're different types of touches. We've still got them. All of us do. So that's a common ground for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So what is complex? What's the difference?
Okay, so the way I look at this, I've been trying to figure out how to explain it. So PTSD, I see as you can isolate it to either an event or a time frame of events. Um, okay, think about it this way. And then complex PTSD is doesn't have that specificity. It's ongoing. It's something that occurred during a season of life. It's more of a time space repetition. Let me explain it this way. So, for if you have any listeners that are old enough to remember 9/11, which seems to us that are old enough to remember it like it was yesterday, and we all know where we were and everything like that. So, that was a single event that traumatized us all. How we woke up that morning, the way we thought about our safety, our national security, the safety in travel, other nations and relationships, versus the way we went to bed that evening had radically transformed. We just weren't the same. We went through that trauma, and it was a 1 day trauma, and it's had, of course, it's had repercussions long past the 1 day, but that trauma happened in 1 day. We can identify that specifically as 9/11. So we still talk about it today. They honor it every September 11th. So that I consider that a PTSD. It's an identifiable event, or even if it's a season, it's an identifiable season, like serving in the Gulf War, or something like that, or something bad that happened to you in your life in a very specific event. Okay, CPSTD is, in my opinion, something that occurs a lot longer in more of a time space continuum. So, for example, I was at an event for a home health agency some years ago, and this young lady came up to me after the event. She was a CNA, and she was gifted, she was bright, she was beautiful, she was articulate, she was passionate about nursing. And she told me, she said, I'm really thinking about going to nursing school, but I'm just not sure if that's for me. And I was like, my goodness, if it's not for you, who's it for? It's like, you seem like the ideal candidate. And she said, well, ever since the time I was a little girl, whenever I wanted to do something, my mother would always say, that's not for you. You're not smart enough, fast enough, pretty enough, rich enough, popular enough, whatever. You're not. So she heard that, not just in a single episode, she heard that repeated for over many, many, many years. So that was a trauma that she carried, and it was complex because it wasn't an identifiable thing. It was many different episodes all compiled so that it became complex. It wasn't just like, oh, let me just deal with this one episode and learn how to work through that. It was like, okay, let me learn how to work through this life, like this whole decade or more of where I got these traumatic experiences and messages from. Does
Oh,
that help?
yeah, that's I had
Okay.
no idea that's what it was, because I thought, I mean, that makes total sense. The way you explained it was great, because I thought CPTSD was just like a more difficult situation that happened to you. Not like a string of little things that over time affected you, and like now today all your brain is like compiling those together, you know. Um that makes a lot of sense. Wow. I'm trying to think, well, I'm not gonna just diagnose myself, but I'm trying to think of like I'm like, do I have CPTSD? I don't think I do, but wow, yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. So the key
Well,
difference is basically PTSD is one event, and you can have multiple singular events that you have PTSD from. And then complex PTSD is like little things compiled together to like make who you are today, unfortunately.
right. So PTSD, I would say, is more specific,
Oh, right.
and Complex PTSD still has that traumatic stress, but it's just not as specific because it's so many events compiled to give you the effect that you've got today.
Wow. Yeah. So complex PTSD, it makes would you say it makes you today, like not you, but like the person with CPTSD, just think differently? Like they are operating differently because of the complexity of what they experienced?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like I had a lot of experiences that I would consider very stressful when I was young, and they were messages. They were messages about identity and a worth. You know, you don't measure up, you don't do things well enough, you don't ever belong, you know. It's so, and one of the things I'll jump into this too, and this just came to me like a couple of weeks ago. So this is new as I'm thinking about this, but I was thinking about grief, and I thought, this is sort of akin to PTSD, I think, this post traumatic stress. And it dawned on me that post traumatic stress is actually a form of grief, whether it's PTSD or CPTSD. It's like we are grieving things being the way they were rather than the way we know things should have been.
Mm.
We shouldn't have had to go through that traumatic stress. We shouldn't have had those negative messages sent to us, even if the person did not intend that. It still came across that way. We shouldn't have had those things. And so we're grieving those things that are. We're grieving that life is this way, that life has been this way. What we're really looking for, and this is what occurred to me, and this kind of gets to the spiritual side of it too, but it's like we're really wanting a sense of home. We really want a
Right.
sense of a good, stable, secure home where we're safe, where we're provided, where we're loved, where we're just involved in this thing. And then, like, say we lose somebody that we love, it's like we're not going to have that anymore. So we might have a stress from that, but we're actually grieving that. And then it occurred to me, okay, so our home on earth, in my opinion, was intended to be a model of a greater home, a greater reality, a spiritual, heavenly, godly reality. It's like there's a home we're made for, and we're really grieving that loss too. And in my opinion, the goal is to get back to there. And I think that that's why our real home, the one who is all those beautiful things, who made all this beauty, came for us. It's like I look at it like taking a giant cosmic funnel and funneling all that goodness and beauty down into a person, and you get Jesus. And he said, okay, I'm going to die to all this crazy world, all these wrong messages, and all the wrong things that you've done. Maybe you thought I don't belong, so now you're going to get somebody else and hope to belong to them. And so, you're actually using them to try. Maybe you won't say that probably, but you're using them to try to fulfill your sense of the need to belong. And so he's like, okay, I'm getting rid of all that. You're out of this whole world system, and I'm going to take you into a whole nother new system where you absolutely belong. You always have, you always will. And you're just going through this experience right now, this earthly experience as a spiritual person, where you learn who you've always been, how I've always cared for you, and how you're always going to be cared for. And you're learning to reject all of these lies about your identity and your worth that came to you through all of these stressors, and you're learning to move back to align not with those stressors but to align with your true standing in who I am and in my love and in this all this beauty that's I've got for you. That's how I look at
You're like, and I'm done. That's
it.
no, that's yeah. I mean, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around Jesus, which is totally fine.
Don't we all? Let me know when you
That's
get that part
true.
figured out.
True. I just like it makes sense to me, and I can totally see how you feel that way. I'm just not there yet, which is totally fine. But I just do you think I have questions? So you're saying that life in general is like we're in a sense grieving our true nature and what where we're supposed to be.
Exactly. Our
I
what
can see
life should be like. True nature, true home, true belonging, true identity, true everything. We're grieving that, and we're trying to just figure out how to put pieces together the best we can in this life to try to restore that sense of it.
that. Oh. I get what you're saying. It reminds me of like when I this is so nerdy, but I'm being so honest. It reminds me of when I watch Avatar, like the blue people Avatar, and
Right.
I'm like, damn, like I swear I have a past life as an avatar, but that's a whole other conversation. But I want a sense of belonging in that. Like I'm always like reaching for like other worlds, because I understand and see my soul and who I truly am, and that I'm in a human body right now. Do you know what I mean? And
Oh yeah.
it also reminds me of the term starseed, which I don't like that term because I think it's a weird term, but I like the idea of it. Like we are like multi-dimensional beings who lived like alien-ish lives and we're in a human life right now. It reminds me of that too.
I completely agree with a lot of what you just said. A lot of different things. It's like so number one, yes, I completely believe that we existed prior to this life. Now,
Yes.
that's just my belief. That's not much you can, it's hard to support biblically, but I think it's there. So what I think is we had this identity, this standing, but we didn't really realize what we had. A lot of times, like there's that song that said you don't know what you had till you lose it all. And so in this life, in this experience, we were like, nah, I'm not going to believe that. I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to figure out there's all these things I see around me, people, places, and things around me. Sure, surely that's going to make me fulfilled and happy and content, and I can be in control of it. And he's like, that's never what you were made for. You were always made for my heart. And so I'm going to become a person, die to that, get you back to this, and this is what you're always going to have. I'm getting you back home. So that's what I feel is that so that we had this life before, we've got this life that's coming after, and we are in this transition period where we're figuring that out. We're figuring out where we belong, what we had, what it cost to get it back, what it cost us to align with it in a world that doesn't get that at all. It's a good way to look crazy, but that's I think that's what's happening. We're waking up. I told a friend of mine, we're waking up to what's always been.
Yes, exactly. I believe that 100%. And I I know like the typical idea of Jesus is like the white man. I mean, you understand that he was Middle Eastern and all of that. Um,
Of course, yeah, he wasn't the GQ model. It's like,
right, right. I just, it's, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that all of that wisdom was funneled into one person. I think it's such an interesting belief, and I'm again just not there yet. But do you think, and this is such a weird, maybe this is a weird question, but do you think there'll ever be like another person that is like seen as another Jesus?
well, there's been a lot of people that claim they were. The big thing is they didn't come back from the dead. It's like
Oh,
that
true.
that's the thing. So I think he's the only one that has that power, that life in
Okay.
himself. It's so. But yes, I completely agree with you, man. That is a mind-boggling thing to think. All of this in the universe. I mean, you look at that. You look at those James Webb photos, or the Hubble photos, or the Deep Field, or whatnot, and you realize, we are like this tiny. When we're orbiting one sun that's 333,000 times the size of Earth. We're 93 million miles away. This thing is radiating out in all directions. And at 93 million miles from it, we get just enough light and heat to fuel all life on the planet. And it's one of 2 to 400 billion stars in our galaxy. And our galaxy is one of, they estimate, 2 to 400 billion galaxies in the universe. I mean, it's like an impossible magnitude. And he's like, yep, that's me. Got that. And I love you. You are my heart. You are my soul. You are who I want to be with. I'm like, mind blown. That's just okay. Forget about figuring it out. Forget about figuring it out. I either have to just accept that that's the way it is or not. I cannot figure out my way to it. I've tried, and that is like, okay, I got a bunch of nothing. It's like,
Oh
it's like,
yeah.
but on the other side, if I believe it, that's like the most beautiful thing I could ever possibly imagine. That's the one that's sometimes I think, okay, with all of that impossible magnitude of the universe, and there's my issues. There's all of these universal things, and there's my issue. So if you can handle all the universal things, can you not handle my issues?
Right, exactly. No, that's such an interesting take, and I love to hear your take on not, I guess, religion, but just like Jesus and God in general, because again, like there's such misconstrued versions of the Bible and religion and all of that that can be so harmful. And I think your take is definitely really interesting.
Yeah,
So
and definitely, I just want to say, definitely not a religion. I tried the religious thing. It's like trying to.
right.
There's like God is like this little curmudgeon floating around by Andromeda, and he's always in a bad mood, and you can never do enough. And it's like I tried that. That does not work. That is a
Yeah.
good way to burn out, which I did terribly so. And I can tell you some more things about that. But anyways, it's not that. I do not see Jesus as a little religious icon or the founder of this little religious system with these practices and procedures and whatnot. No, I see him as a love and a heart that's like so much more beautiful and bigger than that, and so much more aligned with a lot of things that the traditional religious people might not consider okay. Like I love mindfulness, I love meditation. I want to meditate on the right things, but when I'm mindful of what's around me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's you. That's you touching me in the breeze and reflecting the light on the water and in the bird song. It's like that's your heart. You're that joyful. Why do the
Yeah.
birds sing? Because they're that joyful. Why are they that joyful? Because you're that joyful and you made them. you
Yeah.
know.
I love that. I love that. So, how did we get here? What the hell? But
Yeah,
so
we meander.
just a little bit. But so CPTSD and PTSD, how how does that connect to like the grieving thing again? Can you say that one more time?
Absolutely. So, what I think with grief is that what we are truly longing for and missing is a sense of home.
Right. Okay.
One of the quotes I wrote in my book, who says so, is that if home didn't feel like home, we will search all our lives for a sense of home. And then
Um,
when these really difficult things happen to us, it just really reminds us, hey, this is not home. I'm not living at home. And we just can't get our minds off of it. We keep reliving that thing that convinces us of that, trying to figure out what to do, trying to figure out how to process it, being all, having reckless, addictive behaviors, making bad choices, having nightmares, just being hyper vigilant, trying to prevent anything else bad from happening. It's all kinds of symptoms of that we take on as a result. But it's like what we're really, when we have PTSD, when a traumatic event happens, there is a grief that we exist in such a world and that we've had such an experience. So
mhm.
what I think one of the best things to do, I've been hearing this recently from a woman who had a massive brainstem stroke at age 26, and she survived it. She's like one of my favorite people to listen to now. She's speaking on Mother's Day at a church in Virginia Beach. I can't wait to hear. But she said that one time after she had the stroke, and the neurosurgeon had a 16-hour microbrain surgery to save her life, but it left her paralyzed in half her face and half her body and very unsteady gait. She has to use a wheelchair. She can walk a little bit, but it looks like she's dancing because she's so imbalanced and unsteady. And she said that after that, they had to do 11 more surgeries after that. And in one of them, they found another completely unrelated aneurysm that they had to operate on. And her friend, instead of coming up to her and saying, "Oh, everything's going to be okay. It's like all going to work out for good. God loves you. It's all going to work out for good." She said that you would might expect from a church friend or something. She said she came up to her and she knelt down to her and she took her hand and she looked her in the eye and she said, "I am so sorry that this is happening to you. I just, I just can't believe it." And she said that was the most healing thing that she could have possibly said. And I'm like, oh my gosh. When I read that, I was like, yes, that is so beautiful. And so many times we don't have to have an answer for a person. I can just go, I am so sorry that we're in such a world where this is happening to you and that you're going through this and this is happening. You
Mhm.
know, I can't fix it, but I can be here with you and I can love you. I can care for you. I can do whatever I can do, but there's a lot of stuff I can't do, but I can care in the meantime.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Just like acknowledging it instead of trying to fix it, because a lot of people
Exactly.
don't need a solution. They just need to be heard and understood and shown empathy too. Um, so the grieving of that unsafe place and like wishing we had a safe environment, that shows up as CPTSD sometimes. And right, you would agree?
Yeah, well, it could be either. I mean, I think that grief is
Right, right.
complicit in both of them. So, one thing I wanted to share with you, I think you'll like this story. So, I was listening to another podcast this week by some guys that I really like to listen to called Wild at Heart, and they were talking about agreements that we make in difficult episodes. And this one guy, he's in his 50s, and they were actually on a trip trying to help some guys in Australia and whatnot. And the guy that was leading the trip told him, he said, he got the impression, and he said, I think that something happened when you were 15 years old. And this guy's in his 50s. And he's like, I got nothing. I can't think of anything. And so he prayed about it. And so he asked, he said, well, God, would you just show me, what are we looking at? And the thing that came to him was Halloween night when he was 15 years old. He had gone with some friends. He was a sophomore. He went with some friends to a senior friend's party. And it was the first time he ever had alcohol. And he had to drive the friends home. And while he was driving, he passed out on this little curvy road, and he ended up jumping the curb and totaling the car by crashing into some trees. Thankfully, he didn't hit anybody or any property, just some trees on a big yard. And he totaled the car. And so his friends all left. They fled the scene. There were a bunch of people looking at him. There was the homeowner yelling at him, and he woke up to that, and he didn't know what to do. And he said he lived about 2 miles away, so he just got out of the car and started walking home. And he said on that walk, he made the agreement that he was totally alone.
Mm,
And he said he made a bunch of other agreements. So it's like, what agreements do we make during those traumatic seasons? And
right,
I can
right.
remember, as a kid. And so I started thinking about that. And I thought, well, there was one time, and I had a bunch of stuff that led up to this. When I was 16, there was this girl in my class that was a friend, one of my best friends at the time, because we were both involved kind of in dark things. And I realize now that often comes because people, they don't care about the dark things. People will say they believe pigs can fly if they can be accepted and belong. So it's like, all you gotta do is say pigs can fly, and they'll rubber stamp you and accept you. And if you lacking that, then you'll do whatever to get that. So that was what was going on. But she was in the band, and they were having a band recital or performance or something up in Richmond, and then they were going to King's Dominion. So I drove up to meet them up there. Thought that was a good thing, and went to King's Dominion with them afterwards. And I didn't realize that they really weren't loving that. I thought we were having a great time. And so they ended up like looking at each other and laughing and running away. And I thought, oh, they're just doing this as a joke. They'll pop back up from behind a bush or something any second. Well, they didn't. And I ended up walking the park at King's Dominion, the whole thing twice, looking for them and never found them. And I made a lot of agreements at that season. It's like, okay, nobody wants me around. Nobody cares. I'm not valuable enough for somebody to be willing to take their time to be a friend here. It's a lot of agreements. And those agreements that we make during those traumatic seasons, we grieve the loss and we make agreements of how we believe life is based on that trauma.
Hmm.
And then, like for this guy, he said that for 40 years, he's in his 50s now, for 40 years, he had walked that 2 mile strip in his mind as a 15-year-old in whatever season he was going through that stayed with him throughout his life. And he was still walking that street on the way back to his home. He couldn't go back to the crash site because that was too difficult and shameful. He didn't want to deal with that. And he didn't know what was going to await him when he got home, but he was pretty sure it wasn't going to be good. So he didn't know where to go. So it's like, I'm alone. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And he was walking. He said he walked that for over 40 years. And I thought, what do we walk in our life? It's like I can look at that. And when I thought about that with the King's Dominion story, I thought, wow, I feel like I've spent so much of my life walking that circuit around King's Dominion, looking for my people, looking for real friends, looking for a home. And so the grief comes in because it's like, I don't think I've found that much of anywhere. It's like, wrong motives, believing these lies. So having to go back and go, no, I renounce this as being my truth. It's not really the truth, and claiming a better truth and a better reality and forgiveness for it and how I've lived as a result. Because hurt people hurt people. There's a quote going around Facebook that says, if you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on those who didn't cut you. And
Hmm.
so I need both cleansing from the bleeding on people who didn't cut me as well as the hurt itself. So that's a thing.
Yeah, that's incredibly insightful because, yeah, I mean, the agreements we make in traumatic situations set beliefs that we carry with us for so long. And
Yes.
I can
Yes.
think of just a personal example for me was I was bullied a lot in elementary school and middle school and probably a little bit of high school that I just don't remember. Because all of the girls in school were like these little itty mini skinny girls, and I would always like had a little belly on me. Like my mother fed me very well. Like I was just very chunky, and I've always had like just meat on my bones, and I was always called fat. I was always picked apart. I was always left out of groups because I didn't look like them. And I actually didn't remember a lot of the instances where I was bullied because I blocked them out. And working with my spiritual mentor now, I realized that I carried that belief, and I made an agreement in those moments that like I have to pick myself apart before anyone else can, so that I'm
Wow.
protecting myself. So I've always
Wow.
had that like inner critic in me, and I wouldn't have known that if my mentor didn't bring me into that head mindset again, because she does like hypnosis and healings and stuff like that. So anyway, so I totally relate to that, and I think it's interesting how we set these beliefs and they don't serve us anymore at the end of the day, and we actually carry these. What were the symptoms that you said that these PTSD and CPTSD show up as? Because I think these instances happen, and we actually have behaviors today that are like developed from these instances, right?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So there's a number of them. I put up some on the phone just so I can remember them all. Let me see if I can get that open. So,
Okay.
okay. One of the well, one of the major ones that I think is just depression. We can just end up depressed. There can be like this chronic sense of sadness or loss. Even if we can't put our finger on it, we can just carry that along with us through life, which is where I think a lot of the grief is. I mean, even just getting older can do that. I was cleaning out the garage the other day and I came across all this stuff and I was like, I'm throwing my life away. It's like literally, it's like I need to clean this stuff out. It's not serving me anymore. And it was so sad. I'm like, wow, my teens are gone, my 20s are gone, my 30s, my 40s, and I'm in my 50s. So it's like, how did that happen? But it happens. Whatever. We're all moving down the road. We're getting farther away from where we were. So there's a grief, there's a sadness, a depression. There's one thing that's very classical of like a higher end PTSD is being easily startled or frightened. Because I mean they used to call it shell shock for people like in the older wars and stuff, and it's like it's just something happens, you hear a loud noise, somebody drops a pan in the kitchen, and all of a sudden you think somebody's shooting at you. One time I was working in a medical equipment company, and we had an old van, and if when you turned it off, it would backfire in like 3 seconds. And so we pulled up to a 7-Eleven one time, and there was an older gentleman getting out of the car next to us, and we turned off the van, and it was like 1, 2, 3, bam, and he was like all cowered down. He was like, when we got out, he said, "I thought y'all was shooting at me." So it's like people associate that. I mean, he might have been in the war. That might have been why he thought that, or maybe just because it was loud. But, we can think things like that. We can think that things that aren't dangerous are dangerous when we get startled or frightened. We can always, and because of that, we can always be on guard for danger. It's good to be aware of a danger when it happens, but if you're always on high alert, we call that hypervigilant. If you're hypervigilant, you're just always looking for a problem. There's a scorpion under every rock, or something bad happening. Somebody always out to get you. That can easily turn into to a problem, and it's difficult. That we can take that issue and pass it on to other people. We can because it's hard to be around somebody who's always seeing a potential problem. So that's
Yes, and
difficult.
I see that in with someone in my life who was in the military. They are so paranoid. It's like that paranoia is
Right.
always on because they're always hyper vigilant. And when I like go outside by myself, this person's always like, "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? Like, what if this happens?" I'm like, "You need to chill. Like, you're not in the military anymore, you know?"
Yeah, it's like I don't need a flak jacket and AK-47 to go out the front door.
Right, right.
Right.
And yeah, so it can also show up in like you think people are always your enemy, you know?
Right.
So I've seen that before for sure. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. Go on.
Well, to piggyback on that, yeah, I mean, I felt that way without any influence like that, without any military combat kind of influence, just because I think people are hurtful. And
Yes.
so I've experienced that. And so I think, well, everybody's going to be hurtful. And so it's like it's always so wonderful when somebody's nice. I was in Costco the other day and asked the woman who was folding the clothes in their clothes display a question, and she was so nice. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. I was thinking to myself, she is so nice. It's like, and there was an event the other day, and somebody specifically reached out to see if I wanted to attend the event. And I was like, of course I do. I told him, I said, it means so much that you actually thought enough to reach out. Because just like back again to that King's Dominion thing, I made the agreement that, I'm not worth being around. And so even to this day, that was like 40 something years ago. It's like, even to this day, if somebody like shows kindness and reaches out, I'm like, oh my gosh, I appreciate that so much. We had a
Yeah.
contractor working on our house recently, and he was so wonderful and personable and easy to be around and so nice. And the guy from AAA that came to change my tire the other day was the same way. And I'm like, you're so nice and efficient. I'm like, that's just what a wonderful experience. I gave him 10 stars on everything.
Yes, yes. And it's good to find that evidence like after traumatic disorder, I mean, traumatic experiences, because our brain will start to look for evidence to back up like all of the beliefs that we set in stone from that traumatic thing. So when we find evidence to go against that, of like, no, there are nice people in the world, like I am safe to go outside, it helps over time, you know?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that helps combat PTSD or CPTSD is cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically is kind of like rewiring your thinking, which is like what you're
Yes.
talking about. So it's like, I love the mindfulness. It's like, okay, let me stop right now. Even if I think the worst thing's going to happen tomorrow or next week or whatever, things aren't going to work in my life, it's going to be a huge shambles, whatever. It's like, let me stop right now and be grateful for what I've got and notice what's around, be mindful of what's around me. I've got food in the refrigerator. I've got a
Yeah.
refrigerator in the kitchen. I've got a kitchen in a house. I've got a house. It's a beautiful day. The trees are outside. The breeze is blowing. The birds are singing. The flowers are blooming. It's like all of these beautiful things. Like, let me get out of my head and into the world around me. Let me stop disassociating and reassociate with it and start. And it can actually be a means of gratitude too. It's like, okay, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. All these bad scenarios that are playing out in my head are not actually my reality in the world around me. Let me tune into the reality. Yes, I had a difficult season, I had a traumatic season, but that is not always. That is just a chapter in the book, but I can turn the page of the book and go on to and write more chapters.
That is so valuable, what you just said. I rewiring the brain, the subconscious is so talked about nowadays, like on social media
Right.
and stuff. And but I think it's so valuable. Do you know what EFT is?
EFT.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm thinking of radio wave transmission now. What are we talking about?
EFT is the tapping, like when people tap on
Oh, yes,
themselves.
yes.
I just got certified in EFT,
Oh,
so that I can
cool.
do it with my clients, and it rewires your brain. So I also want to say EFT is very good to start to help your brain think a different way. Um,
Yeah, that's good. You do the different pressure points and whatnot that I forget
yeah,
what they all are, but I know that the upper lip is one.
yes,
Oh,
exactly.
that's cool.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
just
And
wanted to
then
say that.
yeah, oh, I'm glad you did because that reminds there's a number of physical things that we can do too. Another thing that's very effective on PTSD, they say, is something called EMDR, and it stands for
Oh
eye
yes,
movement desensitization and reprogramming. So the amygdala is the part of our brain where the fear resides. So when we do our eyes side to side like that, and somebody's leading us through that, that deactivates the amygdala, and we can access those memories without the fear automatically kicking in. So it almost like they say, I've heard and Dr. Amen says, and I've heard other people say, it's like it almost like yanks those memories out by the roots because you can get to them and process them without the associated fear that normally kicks in when we think of them.
yes, that's
So
huge. And I also, in the EFT course I took, they taught us how to move your client's eyes, like certain ways to deactivate and activate certain parts of the brain. And I thought that was like such bullshit, but it like literally it's just
yeah,
science, which is so fucking cool.
it's really true. It's real. So what they're teaching you is like that EMDR, the eye movement thing. So and it's amazing that you would think that the way I move my eyes while I'm thinking about certain memories and things can actually turn off the center of my brain that makes them so traumatic for me and allow me to get those memories out and to not be dwelling on them all the time, like so focused on them I can't think about anything else or live my life. Um, but
Yes.
another symptom that I think is a big deal is destructive behaviors. it can be addictions, it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be sex, it can be whatever you get, or it can be a thrill seeking life. When I see like serious thrill seeking people, I wonder sometimes if they're not doing that just to feel more alive, because without it, they don't feel very alive. And maybe there's a trauma that's informing that. So
Yes.
when I see people like a Steve Irwin, if you remember him, that guy that was always taking risks and doing crazy things, oh crikey, he's holding this most poisonous snake in the world by the tail or something. And it's like, it's like when you're taking those kind of risks, why are you taking those kind of risks?
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, eventually you play Russian roulette long enough, eventually you're going to hit a loaded chamber like he did with a stingray and got killed while he was scuba diving. So it's like those things are eventually going to come back to get you. If you're seeking thrills, what is it that you think is so wrong with your normal life that you have to have this high intensity, high adrenaline state of seeking thrills? And so I wonder about that too. But it's like sometimes it's just bad behavior. It's like the things we do are dangerous. Um, a
Yes.
lot of times. So that's one thing. I'll go on these a few more. Trouble sleeping. Boy, and I remember this started for me. I'd always slept really soundly until the pandemic came along, and we almost lost mom's house after she passed because it had a reverse mortgage on it. We were trying to navigate all that during the pandemic, and everybody was closed, and it was terrible. But eventually, that solved in a very miraculous way. My wife ran across a woman pushing a baby stroller across the street while she was painting one day. Struck up a conversation with her because she's friendly that way, and she found out about this naval website for housing. We advertised on it. This woman who had just lost her husband fell in love with it, paid us to keep it on the market. Just all these amazing
Oh,
things. And
wow.
she went to closing 3 times before she was able to get it. She had to change banks because the one bank kept holding another house against her when it was in her husband's name, but her former husband's name. But anyways, it's like amazing things. But I was so stressed out about that and traumatized by that it's like for a long time after that, I would wake up, and I still do sometimes at like 1 or 2 in the morning. Now, sometimes I'm in a great space, in a really grateful space, and sometimes I'm in a stressful space thinking about an issue that's going on. A lot of it depends on how I go to bed. Like Wayne Dyer said, the most important 5 minutes of the day are what you think about right before you go to sleep.
Yes, I stayed up till like 3 a.m. the other night.
Oh wow.
It was so not good. I just was on my phone. I was thinking about my business. I just was like obsessing over what else can I do to make it better? Like just and I haven't had one of those nights in like a long time, but the other night I had one of those and I went to bed at 3 a.m. and my boyfriend woke up at like 5 a.m. to get ready for work. And I started sleep talking to him about like my business. And I
Oh
was like,
wow.
because my brain was still like thinking. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot do that anymore. So I agree. Nighttime routines set up the way your brain can relax throughout the night, 100%.
Absolutely. And and Angie and I, Angie, my wife, and so we have really come to take more seriously what we put in to our minds, even if it's a show that's like, because
Yes.
that's another thing with PTSD is it doesn't have to happen to you personally. It can be a situation that happened to somebody you know. One time
Oh,
I got selected for jury duty, and it was a murder trial, and they asked me, "Have you ever had an experience with murder?" And I was like, "Well, my cousin was killed by his girlfriend, and then she killed herself like a couple hours after." And they're like, "Okay." And I said, "I was robbed at gunpoint a couple of times when I delivered pizza." And they're like, "Okay, you're out of here." So
oh
because
my
they
God, I
know that
did not know that.
we can pick. Yeah, I haven't thought of that in a long time before this, but it's like it's not something I think about a lot. But it's like those things that happen to other people that we know or care about or friends, we can take those on. They say that doctors and nurses in the hospital, they have a lot, they carry a lot of PTSD because of all of the trouble they see with other people. Like especially those emergency room folks, I don't know how they do it because they see some horrible things come through there. And so that's about police or another one because they're exposed to so many difficult situations and violent crimes and things like that. So it's like those things that we take in, even watching it on TV, I think is traumatic sometimes. So it's like we really try to monitor and at least close out our night, if not do the whole night. Watching something beautiful or some interesting thing about gardening or something like that, or silent hiking and then the Dolomites or the Alps or so. We try to put in those beautiful, good images to not put in things that are going to trigger us, but things that are like we talked about, the glitter moments, not the trigger moments, the glitter moments. Find the glitter moments and think on these. What we think about makes a difference in the way we are.
Yes, absolutely. And especially if you've experienced PTSD and CPTSD, like you
Oh
have to be
yeah.
so careful about what you consume. I don't I haven't been diagnosed, but I can just by the way we're talking, I can identify times in my life where I've taken on stress of it still. Anyway, I cannot watch horror movies. I've actually, when I was younger, my parents were always like, you should be a therapist because you're so like kind and like caring. And I'm like, I would take on all of their shit.
Right.
Like, I cannot with that. And I actually, just for an example about how careful we need to be when we consume certain types of content, I was watching the show with my mom and Keith, my stepdad. Um, and this little girl was like getting ganged up on by a ton of men. And obviously, she was at risk of sexual harm. And I'm not going to say the R word, but that's what it was because I don't want to get like,
Yeah.
I don't want to get in trouble for saying that. But by the platforms, not by anyone in my life. But I couldn't watch that scene. I was like, why are we watching this? Like turn this off. It was
Right.
disgusting and horrible. So I mean, one, I've never understood people who can watch scenes like that and like horror movies and stuff. I'm like, how is your brain so okay with like consuming that? But also before bed, we've started putting on like frequency, like nature sounds, and it knocks us out and it literally like turns off my fight or flight mode in like 1 second. So that's also a
Oh,
very
that's
good
great.
tip.
That's cool. But it is back to the media. I mean, it's just so important because, I think so many things invite the darkness.
Yes.
I don't want to dwell on something that invites the darkness. And if I watch something that's dark, you know, I feel like I'm letting that darkness into my environment, my home, my domain, and then I can easily pick that up. And I can often have like really dark, bad dreams as a result. So it's like it's just exposure and people too. This guy was telling you about this podcaster, the Wild at Heart guy. He said that his wife, he was one day with his wife, and his wife got a phone call from her mother. And her mother is a very dark, gloom and doom, sad Eeyore kind of person. And so this guy's always falling. And after talking to her for about a half hour, she got off the phone. She finally hung up. And she was like so depressed and predicting all of these bad things to happen and whatnot. And he was like, wait a minute, time out. What just happened there? It's like this darkness from her mom jumped off on her, even in the phone conversation. And she's like, "Oh, wait a minute, yeah, that's right." So it's like, no, I renounce all of this stuff, and no, I'm not claiming that. I'm claiming good things that God's got for me, not all this doom and gloom stuff that my mom just brought to me. And it's true. It's true when you're counseling people too. Just like what you're saying with the clients, it's like this guy that I'm talking about is a counselor, a Christian counselor too, and he said that sometimes people have come to him with some issues, and then he starts having all these weird thoughts and this dark thoughts and whatnot. And he used to think it was him, and then all of a sudden he's like, "No, it's not me. You're bringing me your stuff, and it's affecting me. It's not my stuff. This is your stuff." Even before they get to the office, it's like their stuff is there, And so he's like, "Wow, no, I'm not going to own that." And it's like, so we got to be careful who we're not only the media we take in, but who we're around too, and the environment we put ourselves in.
Absolutely. I think that's like boundaries are important. Be very selective about who you let into your energy. Cleanse and protect your energy if you're woo woo like me. But yeah, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think that energy, like you say that, I mean, there's so much more going on with that than we realize. And like traditional church people would think, oh, that's just new age. I'm like, no, it's not. That's real age. That's like right now. It's
Yeah.
like you got to be really careful about that. He's like, now in the West, we think all that kind of stuff is silly. Wow, in a lot of other cultures, they realize that's really true. I heard a story I'll tell you about there was this missionary family in Africa, and they had come home like for some time off or whatever to raise some funds or whatever they did. And while they were here, their kids picked up like these Christian rock tapes and whatnot. So back in the day that tapes were a thing. So then they took them back to where they lived in Africa, and they had the windows open one day, and one of the kids was playing it and rocking out to that. And this former witch doctor came to the door, and he was like really in an uproar, and he was knocking on the door, and they came and they said, "Yeah, what's going on? Why the urgency?" He said, "Why are you summoning the evil spirits?" And he's like, even the rhythm, Huey Lewis saying, it's still that same old backbeat rhythm that really, really drives them wild. It's like even the music that we put in, the tone of it, the frequencies, like you said, about the peaceful frequencies that you listen to before you go to bed versus that energy amping crazy kind of frequency. It's like, why is music so powerful? Why do people get so into it, and if you ever had that thing where it's like you'll get a song on your mind and like, no, I want to hear that song right now, you know and it's like, why? What is it that we're relating to in that? So there's an energy in so many things, and we need to be aware of those energies, like you're talking about.
Absolutely. Are there any other symptoms you want to share of how this shows
Oh,
up
let me see.
in life?
Yeah, there were a couple. So trouble sleeping, I said trouble concentrating. It's hard to concentrate because you've got so much on your mind that it's hard to get into the moment and really stay with it and concentrate. Irritability, angry outbursts, or aggressive behavior. There can be so much latent or not so latent anger at the events that happened. That grief, it's like we can just be mad at life, mad at people, mad at ourselves, that we can be like, oh my gosh, we can take that on. That's the last thing, is overwhelming guilt or shame. Like
Mm,
for the guy that was leading, that might have been leading his troops through to do something over in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, and then they hit an IUD and his friend got killed. Okay, they can think, oh, if I were just better, I would have known that that was there. I would have. Did I say IED? That's what I meant.
oh
I
yeah,
got
I got it.
so
Yeah.
frustrated. Okay, good. But it's like it's not. How could you have known that? I know a guy that was hit by somebody driving down the wrong side of the street, and he said, and this was a counselor, and he said, I just felt for so long, I felt so guilty about that. Like, if I were just better, if I were sharper, if I were more alert, I could have just seen that and gotten out of the way. It's like the guy's clearly in the wrong. It's like, he's the one on the wrong side of the street. And it'd been nice if you had avoided it, but we can't avoid everything. We got to accept ourselves at some point and free ourselves. Like you were talking about, that inner critic and the judge too. It's like we just all carry that critic, that judgmental, critical spirit towards ourselves,
It's
until we
forgiveness.
recognize it. It is. It's self-forgiveness, yes, and other people too.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I actually, now that you say guilt or shame, I 1000% have, I mean, not anymore. I feel like I've healed a lot of it, but I have PTSD from certain like sexual traumas I've experienced. And the other day, and thank God I'm very hands-on with my therapist and all of this. So just so you guys know, like, I'm not just dealing with all of this on my own, because I do think professional help is 100% needed when you're dealing with PTSD and CPTSD.
Right.
But guilt or shame is such a prevalent symptom with sexual trauma too, because a few days ago I had a session with my therapist and my spiritual mentor who like does some type of like a little bit of EDMR and like all of that stuff. um and I felt so guilty for no reason. Like I it was
Mhm.
like something about it was my fault that I experienced that, but I was the victim. So it's interesting how our brains start to twist things into like, no, you're the bad one, and like you're in
Right.
trouble. So I just wanted to add that like that is such a prevalent symptom with stuff like this. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like, yeah, I
Um,
was, I was with a group the other day, and the person speaking said, it's like, we're all broken in this way. We've all had brokenness sexually. It's like, it was like such a gift to this world. And then that was one of the major things that got messed up, you know?
Absolutely. Yes, in a huge way, in tons of ways. It's
Right.
so horrible. Um, so how do these experiences and having this knowledge impact our spiritual journeys? I feel like we've talked about like being careful with energy, because especially if you have a, I don't want to say like compromised brain, but if you've experienced PTSD and CPTSD, you definitely have to be careful about what you let into your energy, just like I said, which I think is pretty spiritual take on things. But is there anything you want to add about spirituality in this sense?
Just, the biggest thing for me was, and I was so impacted, this was just this week, that I was so impacted by that conversation where the guy said, I'm in my 50s, and for like 40 years I've been walking down that same 2 mile stretch of road where I made all those agreements. I think breaking the agreements and going, okay, I agreed with that, but not anymore. I'm renouncing that. I'm claiming grace and love and forgiveness. And I mean, I always claim it in Jesus. I'm like, this grace just poured over that I can't understand. It's bigger than anything I can understand. I'm just in it. Just like I'm in this universe and I can't understand the universe. It's like I'm that's what I'm gonna align with, not these other things that I've aligned with and believed. I'm breaking those agreements. So to
Mhm.
me that's freedom. And like the guy said, he said, I just felt after I did that like 100-pound weight had been lifted off of me. And I'm like, I
Yes.
get that. I feel the same way. It's like these things that have just informed my life that I've carried with me, even that I didn't recognize. That it's like when I recognize those and break that agreement and claim grace, love, mercy, compassion, all the good stuff. It's like when I do that, it's like, oh my, what a breath of relief.
Yeah, well, it's the power of deciding because in those moments, we've decided something that's true. And when we decide something different, it's like something clicks and we're like, oh, this actually doesn't have to be like my reality anymore. So the power of deciding and like accountability and self-awareness is so powerful.
I completely agree. I mean, I think it's a gift. I mean, when you said that about deciding, I immediately went back in my mind mentally to the Garden of Eden. I thought there was a choice. I'm either going to believe that I am all this and you are all this and you got all this for me and I'm completely at home and always will be and every good thing is mine, or I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to take that freaking apple, and it looks good. It's good for food. It's going to make me wise. I'll get all this, and it's like, oh my gosh. And since then, all of us have had that come to us, and we're like, oh no, well, I'm going to be wise in my own mind and in my own eyes. I'm going to do all these things. And now we got the world, this hot mess that it is. And it's like, yeah, right, right, right. Maybe that didn't work out so good.
Exactly, exactly. And do you think that in these traumatic moments that have caused us to have PTSD, in those moments when we made an agreement or set a belief in place and we agreed that something is true and we take it with us, that was our brain's way of our ego or whatever you want to call it. It was a way to protect ourselves from it happening again.
S- Possibly, possibly, depending on that agreement like maybe the agreement that I'm not safe, I have to be more careful. So
Right.
I'm trying I mean, that's one that pops into mind immediately. So yes, I think that's true. But I mean, a bigger one, because I think those agreements are the end game. I think we're born, spiritually speaking, I think we are born into a world at war. Where
Sure.
it's not a neutral war. There is something, I mean, that everybody, I went through this class and it was global and there were people from all religions and stuff. And when they talked about the judge, that inner judge that's always saying bad, 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 we're bad, other people are bad, circumstances are bad. It's like everybody agreed with it. Everybody knew that voice. It's like, wow, that's interesting. I mean, it was like people, it was atheists, agnostics, Zoroastrians, Buddhists, Muslims, all kinds of people like that. Christians, it's like, but everybody knows that that's a universal occurrence. So it's like, are we going to align with this thing that says bad, bad, bad? You're not loved. You're not worthy. You're alone. You're whatever you are. And I'm going to base my life around that. Like a
Mhm.
lot of when I do personality training, especially in organizations, the really hard driving, D-oriented people, they're the ones who I look at it as a racehorse jockey. They're always trying to drive the horse to the finish line. So the ones who are doing that, their greatest fear is being taken advantage of. So it's like, wow, where did that fear come from? Why, how did that get formed? I'm always curious about that you're so adamant. Now they are successful according to this worldly standards, because they're always trying to avoid and move people forward and drive things. But a lot of their people will resign because they're tired of being driven.
Right. There's that.
So,
Yeah.
but it's like, where did that fear come from? What is it that you're believing? Where did that come from? What agreement there do you need to break and believe something better?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Is there anything else you want to add? I mean, we kind of went over our whole outline here.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. We've covered a lot, but yeah, just the guilt and shame thing. It's like that can be back to that again. That can be such a heavy weight, and we can end up taking responsibility for things that are clearly not our fault.
Yes.
And going, okay, it's just because I'm a bad person. If I were a better person, that scenario wouldn't have happened and things would be different. And it's like, no, that's adding insult to injury. It's
Yes.
like that's just awful. But people carry that around. It's like it's a very false guilt. Now we should take responsibility for things that we're at fault with, but not responsibility for things that we couldn't control and that we did not influence or want to happen. I just want to say that it's like there's a I've heard the phrase "shame off you." I love that because it's like my grandma used to say "shame on you," whatever. But it's like no, how about shame off you? How about shame
Mhm.
off you? How about grace that takes the shame off you? And it's like, now I get to be free to be the person I was always meant to be, and without the shame and without all of the regret, without the fear, without the addictions, without all of that stuff. And to get back to the home I always really wanted to have, like a real home, a real muchy home with I mean, I think at Christmas, I think people love Christmas because they think, wow, that's one of the closest things we're going to get to that time. And then we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make it like perfect. And then it's like the pressure we put makes it not perfect. But it's like, I think that people often want that. And it can be a really great time, but we're looking for those things in the holidays and in other things like that. We're like, okay, we're going to make this the perfection that we don't feel like in most of our lives.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about it connecting to that belief that we're bad people because what helps me in moments of like I can tell that I'm starting to in a difficult situation in present day, for example, and I start to revert back to anxiety of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, I'm a bad person, I it's my fault, like all of these things that obviously stemmed from situations in my past. Um, what really helps me in those moments is immediately reframing those thoughts in my mind with affirmations really help, and like feeling the affirmations in my body of like I am innocent, I am a good person, I treat people well, like just reminding myself that actually those stories aren't true in the moment is has been huge too, so that's something you can do.
Absolutely, and I'll say this too. A minute ago, I think you were talking about a therapist or a mentor of yours, and just in that moment, I just had like the impression of like all the love in the universe just hugging you with this biggest, warmest embrace, like for you and your heart. It's like I think that's the end game. That's where we want to be, and that's what we're afraid isn't. So it's like I just again like I think and I know it's hard to associate this one little human figure with being all of that, but I think that's the reality. But it's like we will need all of that. We need that hug for our heart,
Mhm.
and
I
that
think
warm hug for our heart. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. I think Jesus and the universe and my ancestors and my spirit guides and like all of these beings, I think they're all like working together. I don't like I bel like what do you think about that? Like do you think there's like multiple things?
I well, I think there's a lot of things going on, but you just reminded me of this book my dad used to read called "Your God Is Too Small." And I think that is so true. So many of the traditional platforms and stuff, I'm like, your God is way too small for my mind and heart, not alone one that's way beyond all that. So it's like, yeah, I think that I think that it's almost because of the way we've been taught and things, it's almost impossible to disassociate Jesus from just that one human figure that we think about when and it's in the Bible. It's like it's hard to do that. But the Apostle Paul said, though we knew him once as a man, we don't know him that way anymore. And I'm like, well, what
Right.
do we know him as?
Right.
What is he actually in essence? Like, what are we in essence apart from these bodies? I think we're so much more than we know, than we understand each other. It's like when you look at somebody, you might have initial thoughts, and then when you get to know their story and who they are, you're like, oh my gosh, I never realized that. You got all of that. So it's like I think that we're a lot more than we realize just in this human body. So though I think that he was a man, that Jesus was a man in a human body, I think he's so much more than that. And that one day we're gonna go like, oh my gosh, you're all that. Hey, I always knew that was there, I always had a sense of it, but I didn't understand that wow, that's you. You're that good. You're that amazing. Oh my gosh, mind blown.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this was a really good talk. I learned so much. I hope the listeners learned so much too. Is there anything else you want to share about anything we said?
I think I feel pretty complete. Like this is pretty good. So again, thank you, Mac. I always love talking to you about these things. It's like, I have a hard time finding people who want to talk about these things. So it's like it's always a thrill when somebody does, and I'm glad it's you, and I'm glad you're having me here, and we get to have these conversations and invite other people to listen in, which I hope they do.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely will. I think, wait, let's see. Your episode last time got got 25 listens, so
Oh,
pretty good.
cool,
Yeah, about,
cool.
which
Hey.
is like pretty average. Like I think my highest one was like 40 something. So we're small, but we're starting somewhere, and your episode got a lot of love. So we're, yeah, people are gonna
Well, and you never know. It can just be one person, but it's like, Mahatma Gandhi was one person. Nelson Mandela was one person. It's like world changers usually don't happen in big groups. It's like a single person with a vision changes the world. So, you never know who that's going to be. So hopefully it's us.
yes, let's do it. I love that.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
absolutely.
Well, thank you for talking with me too. I think I love having these kinds of conversations because you're right. Like in our everyday lives, a lot of people don't want to have these conversations. So that's why I love my
No, they
podcast.
don't. They don't. It's like when I go for a walk, I'll often greet people. They don't even want to look at you. They want to just pretend that you don't even exist, that you're not there. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, what is up with that? What got us to this point? It's,
Yeah.
it's like, hello, hey, how you doing? Hey, how's your day going? It's like,
Yeah,
it's more fun that
exactly.
way. So thanks for being that way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, of course, you too. Um, and thank you for sharing all of this knowledge too, because I know it's a lot of research and getting thoughts together and energy. So thank you for sharing all of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just I'm just giving you my experience, and it's taken a long time to come to some of these conclusions. So, it's like, wow, how did that boy, wouldn't that be a bit nice to know when I was 20 or something? It's like, well, but it just takes it takes some time. It takes some time to figure things out sometimes and to receive some revelation about things and whatnot. So it's like we really have to give ourselves a break and give ourselves some patience and some grace. And it's like, okay, look in the mirror. It's like, well, you've had a lot and you're doing the best you can, and so are other people, and so let's give each other a break.
Yes, absolutely. How can people get in touch with you to work with you further and stuff like that?
Yeah, so they can reach out directly on email. It's my email is Jeff at jeffbirdcoaching.com. Bird is with a Y, Jeff at jeffbirdcoaching.com. Or they can go to my website, which is jeffbirdcoaching.com. So both of them are pretty similar. So yeah, I would love to hear from anybody, and individually or group or corporate or whatever you got. It's like I love trying to figure out what can excuse me, build people up and help them. So just let me know if there's anything I can do that would help take that next step for you or your group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll put all of that information in the episode notes so that they can click on your website and your email and all of
Cool.
that. And thank you everyone for listening. Please rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. And my next episode is going to be fun too. I'm starting to give little hints in the previous episode for the next one to get everyone excited. But I'm gonna be bringing on a psychic healer and fitness coach, Audrey, who I connected with on Instagram to talk about her fitness journey and spirituality together because she uses both, which I think is really cool. So make sure to
Mm,
tune into that one. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you all so much.
cool.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye
All right.
guys.
Take care.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. Head to themackenziecollective.com to work with me further. If you have any questions or have any topics you want me to cover or any guests you want me to have on, please email all of that to info@themackenziecollective.com or go to the episode description to fill out my Google form. I love you. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.